Lauren, does my slide still look good? It's still sharing okay?
Looks good.
Fantastic. All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Devanshu.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's session of Ready for Pre-K. I'm Devanshu Gardner with the Early Childhood Education Division, and we're so pleased that you're joining us this evening to learn more about ways to support your child's early literacy development with the help of our friends at the DC Public Library. Before we get started, there's a few housekeeping items I want to go over. We're using Zoom to host tonight's session. Throughout the session, we invite you to enter your questions and comments into the Q&A. You're also welcome to unmute and engage and ask questions if you feel comfortable. And we love hearing your voices, so please feel free to do so. This session will be recorded and posted on the DCPS YouTube page. So for that reason, some of the camera features may be turned off for certain guests at the time at this time. Let us know in the chat if you're experiencing any tech issues. Okay, so we're offering simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, so I'm going to pause for a moment while those who would like to utilize this function can do so now. Instructions are on screen and also in the chat. So I'm just going to pause for maybe 20-30 seconds.
Perfect. Thanks, Devanshu. Let anybody access that who needs it. All right. Looks like we're good.
Looks good. Okay. All right, so we'd like to start all of our Ready for Pre-K sessions off with some general community agreements for our time together. We're committed to making sure that this forum is a place where everyone feels safe, welcome, and respected. All right, and now I'd like to welcome our special guest this evening, Lauren Woody. Lauren is the Early Literacy Coordinator for DC Public Library, and we're excited to have her joining us this evening. Welcome, Lauren.
Thanks so much, Devanshu and Drew, for having me, and thank you to the folks who are here for joining. Like Devanshu said, my name is Lauren Woody, and I'm the Early Literacy Coordinator for DC Public Library. That picture is like 2 pairs of glasses ago, so it brings up fun memories. So tonight I'm going to be talking about, as was already said, early literacy, about some skills that children learn before they go to school that help them get ready to learn to read once they go to school. About some practices you can do to encourage those skills, and also about the library system, some resources that you may or may not have known are available to you, and things like that. So if you have questions, please feel free to unmute. It's a very small group that's in the room right now. So you're more than welcome to just ask aloud. And hopefully my Ready for Pre-K friends can monitor the chat while I'm sharing my slide and the Q&A in case anything comes in that way.
For sure. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Lauren, so that you can take over.
And I will share my screen. So let's get started. So as I said, tonight's presentation is called STAR, which stands for Sing, Talk, and Read. That's kind of the DC Public Library's slogan for our early literacy campaign. And our website and my email address are both on the screen. Drew, is it possible to send out slides to people who registered after the workshop?
Yeah, absolutely. We can send out slides, and we're recording the session, and so we'll post a recording of the session on the DCPS YouTube page where folks can access it as well.
Great. So you don't have to scribble those things down unless you really want to. And folks who registered and weren't able to make it will be able to access it as well. So to get started, just what are we going to be talking about tonight? So we'll be talking about three main things. As I said, early literacy, and then the practices that you can do to encourage early literacy, singing, talking, reading, and also writing and playing. It just doesn't fit into the STAR slogan very, very smoothly. And then about DC Public Libraries resources and services. So let's go forward instead of backwards. There we go. But first, a little detour into, this is the only science-y slide, I promise. If that's not your thing, it is my thing. I think it's super interesting, but I love to start with this slide when we're talking about early literacy, because I think it really illustrates, after I explain it a little bit, how active children's brains are in the age range that we're talking about. So if you look on the slide, there are 5 vertical rectangles, and the first one says newborn underneath of it. And there's some like little spidery shapes, and those are neurons, which are brain cells. And you know, babies in the womb are forming all of their cells, including brain cells, so they already have neurons. And then all the lines that connect those shapes are synapses. And all that synapses are connections between neurons. They are pathways along which messages are passed in the brain. And that's how people learn. It's how they remember things. It's how they think, is those messages that go between neurons, right? And so you can see when a child is born, they already have some of those connections. You can see some of those lines connecting. You know, in the womb, they have all their senses by the time they're born. And so they're developing through those sensory experiences, some of these connections. And then by the time they're 1 month old, they already have so many more. By the time they're 9 months, it's like a whole spider web, right? That center rectangle. And then 2 years, it's just like a whole scribbly mess. The first 3 years of a child's life, they're developing brain connections at a faster rate than at any other time in their life. And the way that those connections are developed is through sensory experiences. So when a child hears, sees, tastes, touches, we know little ones like to touch and put everything in their mouth, right? Smells, when they have any of those experiences, they are learning about the world around them. And the connections that are the strongest, and perhaps on this visual representation, the darkest and thickest, are the ones that are repeated over and over and over. So if you think about when you drive to work or take the metro to work, you get there, and if you try to remember how you got to work, you might not be able to remember actually doing it, because it's just like autopilot for you. You're just used to doing it, right? Something that is just second nature. And those are those really thick brain connections. Those are the really strong ones that are kind of ingrained in your memory. Something that you might notice as you go from the 2-year-old to the adult is there's a difference. So they've kind of been increasing and getting thicker and darker up until 2 years. And then something interesting happens between the 2-year-old representation and the adult one. And does anybody, I know there's not that many people on the call, but does anybody want to maybe say what they notice are some of the differences between those two? And it can be,
yes, it seems like the synapses are they're less in the adult brain than they are in the 2-year-old brain.
Yes, that's exactly right. Thank you so much for bravely speaking up, Sandra. I appreciate you. Yeah, so up until then, they've basically only been blooming is the word. It's kind of like a garden metaphor that I guess there is used in neuroscience. So you know, those synapses have been blooming, they've been increasing. And then when we get to the adult one, we notice that there are fewer. Some of them are really thick, and therefore, you know, that represents a strong synapse, but there are fewer of them. And that's because the brain also does something called pruning. So it gets rid of the connections that it's not using. And that's like a really healthy process, right? Like your brain can only hold so much information. If it if you remembered every single thing from your whole life, it would be chaos, right? And it would be really inefficient and hard to get anything done. So pruning is a good thing, but I only show that part to show that if we want children to gain skills that they hang on to, that we need to repeat practices over and over. Repetition is how it's done. And so like, if you're reading a book with your child and they want to read the same book over and over, and you are super done with that book, and you're like, why won't my child be exposed to new things, you know? It is good to expose them to new things, but it's also developmentally appropriate and useful in the learning process to repeat those stories over and over, to repeat those songs over and over. They crave that because it's familiar and it's comfortable, but also it's because that's how they learn. So that's just some info just to show how important these years are in a child's learning. And early literacy is one of those things that that they are developing at this time. And so when we're talking about early literacy in different contexts, sometimes people use this term to talk about children that are learning to read independently. You know, those kindergarten, first, second graders that are starting to read on their own. In the public library world and in my role, when I say early literacy, what I'm talking about is those things that children learn before they go to school. So all of the things that children are learning about language, stories, reading and writing before they actually learn to read and write themselves in school, things that they're learning from the time they're born. And honestly, even before that. And so what are those things? So there's 7 skills. There's lots of skills, but there's 7 that I like to talk about. These are things that children are developing before they know how to read, but that are going to set them up for success when they go to school, especially in terms of language and reading. So narrative skills is pretty straightforward. You know, how are stories structured? How are stories told? You know, stories have a beginning, middle, and end. You know, can a child sort of track a story and, you know, recall a story, all of those types of skills. Background knowledge, that's everything. That's everything that a child's learning about the world around them, how the world works. So the reason why that's important specifically for literacy is because when a child goes to school, if they are reading a book, let's say about outer space, and they have never heard about rockets, planets, stars, or the moon, it's going to be really difficult for them to grapple with that text on top of all of the other things that they're trying to do, like decode the words and all of that, you know, all those reading skills. You know, they've never been exposed to the concepts even. And so as much as children can be exposed to concepts about the world, the better set up they're going to be for a less frustrating time when they're learning how to read, right? So letter knowledge is the third one, and that's really straightforward. That's just, what do letters look like? What do they sound like? What do they mean? So a child understands that a letter that's written on a page, you know, what that is, that it's a letter, and that letters make up words. And they understand that, you know, they start to be able to recognize, you know, that's an A, that's a B, that's a C, and how do I say those things? So the fourth one, phonological awareness, is a very sciencey term. All it means is how things sound. So being aware of little sounds that make up language, being able to hear them and pick them out, like little syllables, understanding that sounds make up words, all of that. And then the last 3, print awareness, how books and text work. So in English, we read from left to right. We read from top to bottom. If you're working with a different language, it may be the opposite, but knowing how that works in the language that you're reading in is print awareness. Understanding that books have pages and that you flip them and how to do that. Understanding that books are written by an author and they are, you know, illustrated by an artist or an illustrator. All of those types of concepts go into print awareness. And so even a baby or a toddler who's chewing on a book, that may look like it's destructive, but it actually is them developing print awareness. They are understanding how that book works. They are learning that that book has pages and they start to pull them apart, right? They're learning eventually, you know, you put a book in front of a toddler upside down, eventually they'll turn it over. And that is them demonstrating their print awareness. Vocabulary, just how many words has a child heard? How many words does a child know? How many words does a child understand what it means? And then print motivation is the number one thing that I care about at the public library, is making sure that children feel that books, language, and stories are fun, that they have a positive association with these things. And that way, when they encounter difficulties later on in their schooling or whatever it is, they have those things to fall back on. They're motivated to keep trying to learn to read. They are motivated to get through those difficulties, and they have a desire to learn to read. Does anyone have questions about these skills? Whether it's specifically what the skills mean or how they show up in the lives of children?
No, I'm keeping an eye on the chat. I don't see anything yet, but Lauren, I just love how much you called out all of these different skills that develop. I think a lot of times, like you mentioned, when we think of early literacy development, we jump right to reading in the classical sense, and we forget how much work and how much development goes into it before a child is ready for that, right? And that even little things like you mentioned, having, you know, how babies are handling books and chewing on them and exploring the pages, like all of that is part of the process and really important to this development.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
I agree. It seems, I mean, this is very familiar. I mean, I have a 13-year-old daughter, and this is exactly what she did before she went to school. And she actually she talks about coming home to see her alphabet train, and you know, just sort of learning and exploring through play, and having books everywhere, and and just sort of understanding how books work, and just making that exciting, and also just really a part of the culture at your home or in your home. And so I think all of that is important. And you know, just going through the world and looking at words everywhere and recognizing words on signs, and just talking
Yeah.
about what you're observing. I think that's a part of it too.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying all of that, because it's a really nice lead into the next slide. It's like you wrote the transition. But also, yeah, I'm really thankful that you brought up like a real world example of how you've seen this play out. I think like I don't show this slide. I know it's like a lot to, I don't show the slide so that people feel like they have to memorize all of these. Like, you know, I don't show it to be like another overwhelming thing. I know parenthood, like you're constantly thinking about milestones, and is my child hitting this milestone and that milestone? And so I don't show this slide to be intimidating in that way. Like, have I thought enough about phonological awareness, or is my child exhibiting narrative skills? I simply show it to show that like you will see these things as you are working with your child, as you're playing with your child, like you mentioned, reading, singing, all the things we're going to talk about. You'll start to notice these things, and they have names, and they are important, and they're actually skills that have been studied. You know what I mean? It's a legitimate and important thing that you are doing when you are helping your child develop these things. So that's what I hope people take away from it, and not sort of one more thing to measure up against, because that can be, you know, overwhelming. I say that as someone with a baby myself.
Hey,
So
Lauren, quick
yeah,
question. I'm
yeah.
wondering, you know, now with like being able to put books, what are your thoughts on books on a Kindle or an iPad versus like just a physical act of an old school book? You know, what are your thoughts on that? Is there a difference?
Yeah, I think there's a difference, but I don't think that um, that ebooks are negative. I think it's one more way for children to experience words and language and stories. And I think the number one thing, and the American Academy of the AAP, what does that stand for? Pediatrician? Yeah.
Yeah, American Academy of Pediatricians, Pediatrics.
Pediatrics, yes. I think would back me up on this. Based on their screen time recommendations for children under 2, the number one thing is that there is interaction with an adult or a real person in their life around that object. And so if your child is experiencing screen time, whether it is an ebook, an animated book, a movie, whatever it is, that you're having conversation with them at the same time and you're pointing things out, they're not going to learn from the voice on the screen telling them things, but experiencing that visual stimulus and experiencing those auditory stimuli, and then having those conversations with someone and having someone to sort of interpret and make them think about it and point things out. That's how they're going to learn. And so I think with ebooks, they're great. You know, you can read, you can point to the text as you're reading it so that children start to associate the text that you're reading, the symbols with the words that you're speaking. You can do all the same things that you're doing with a real book, except they're not getting that tactile experience. So a combination of both would be great, because then they can turn the pages, they can learn about the book as an object, and get that different experience. But if you're on a flight and all you have is your Kindle, like, don't withhold books just because they're not tactile books, right? So I think yeah, it's different but not bad is my short answer and my long-winded answer came before.
Thank you for bringing that question up, and thank you for addressing it. I agree that I think, there are many ways to gain literacy skills, and certainly we're all online doing all kinds of things. But when you were talking, I was thinking about folks who are not comfortable in their own literacy, and if they're trying to build the literacy skills of the children around them, and they really do want that to happen, but they're not comfortable. They don't think that they're good readers themselves, right? And so supplementing that with some online read alouds, things like that. But the key is to still be involved with your children,
yeah,
while they're doing that, and trying your best to use a variety of ways to engage kids around reading in books. But I love physical books, but I'm comfortable in my own literacy, and I like to read, but not everybody does like to do that, right?
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that, like, adults are at all different levels too, and come from all different experiences and their backgrounds. So, things like audiobooks or, like you said, online read alouds, like, can be a really helpful tool for someone who isn't comfortable reading aloud. But like you said, they can still be involved in that process and have conversation, ask a question about, what was just read, point to something in the illustrations, and talk about it. So yeah. So all of those skills that we just talked about are here on the screen. They're on the right-hand side. Those are the skills that children are learning. On the left-hand side are all of the things that we can do to help them learn. And they're things they're already doing as parents, as early childhood educators, wherever you're coming from. These 5 practices are things that you are already doing. And whether you think of them as learning tools or not, they are. So we've mentioned reading already a bunch. Reading is, of course, going to contribute to all of those literacy skills that you see on the screen on the right. But singing, talking, writing, and playing do as well. So if we take singing, for example, when you're singing with a little one, with a toddler, a preschooler, can anyone connect that practice of singing with 1 or 2 of the skills that you think children are developing while you're singing? So if I'm singing with a child, what are some of the skills on the right-hand side that they are sort of building through that practice?
Narrative skills, vocabulary, phonics. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, so narrative skills. So the Itsy Bitsy Spider, let's say, if that's a song that you know and you sing, that is a very simple story. The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. right? The sun comes out, the rain dries up, and the spider goes back up. There's a beginning, middle, and end. It's very simple, but it is a narrative, and many children's songs are like that. Many adult songs are like that. They're gaining, you mentioned vocabulary. So there's a lot of vocabulary words in songs that I wouldn't say to a toddler in my regular speech, but that if I'm singing with them, they're going to be exposed to. Like, I'm gonna stick with nursery rhymes, but this could be music that you like to listen to on the radio, right? Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. I never use the word fetch in my daily life. I don't know about you all. But if I'm singing that song with my child, they're hearing that word and they're starting to learn what it means. So they're being exposed to a broader vocabulary through songs. You mentioned phonological awareness. Obviously, music is all about sound. So when we're singing, we're slowing language down. I'm a very fast talker. So if I say twinkle, twinkle, little star, and a little one, they're learning English. Imagine someone speaking a foreign language and you're hearing them talk really fast. It's very hard to parse what they're saying. But if I sing twinkle, twinkle, little star, they're hearing all of the sounds in those words much more slowly so that they can mimic them, right? And we could go through, most of the skills would be represented if we went through each one with singing, background knowledge, whatever the song is about, the child's learning about, they're hearing about. And we could do the same thing with all 5 of these practices. We could connect them to each of these in some way. I mean, even letter knowledge, if you're singing the ABCs with your child, the ABC song, you are building letter knowledge through song. The main thing that I wanted to say about the other practices, the main things that I want to say are that writing with, children under 5, obviously we're not talking about teaching them to write full words and sentences and paragraphs, right? We're talking about learning to hold a crayon. We're talking about scribbling. We're talking about building fine motor skills through all kinds of activities that you wouldn't even really think of as writing. So anytime children are using their hands in small ways, they're building muscles so that they can write when they go to school. So all of those types of activities are included when I say writing with children. Obviously, you're not going to write with a baby, right? And then playing is, goes throughout all of these. So all of the things that you're doing with children when they're learning activities should be playful, because that's what builds that reading motivation. That's what makes things fun. And that's how children learn, right? Play is the work of childhood is like a common saying, because it's true. And I think that someone submitted a question about reading and talking in different languages. So I wanted to address that too, especially here with talking. So from the time kids are born, you want to be talking with them. It's awkward when they can't talk back, but you can just narrate your day. You can say, when you're cooking, you can say, I'm picking up the spatula and I'm flipping the eggs over, and just talk about what you're doing, right? You're at the grocery store, whatever your day holds, just go through and talk about what's happening, what you see, what you hear, what you smell. And even with babies, you can start to have back and forth conversation. So if a baby or a toddler is sort of babbling at you, even if you don't know what they're saying, you can respond. Or if you ask a question, you can pause and wait for them to respond. Whether or not they do, they're learning through that experience what back and forth conversation is like, how conversations are structured, right? So talking is important from day one, and it's important to do it in a language that you're fluent in. So if your fluent and most comfortable language is English, awesome. If it's another language, awesome. If you want to speak, 2 languages, so you're comfortable with 2 languages, great. But the most important thing is that a child hears fluent language spoken so that they can hear what that sounds like. They can hear, they can hear like the rules of a language being played out while you're speaking to them, and they can hear, you know, how sounds are spoken fluently next to each other. It doesn't matter what language it is. So when a child goes to school, or, you know, in their life, they're going to hear English, they're going to learn English. And so if your fluent language is not English, talk, sing, and read in the language that you're comfortable with. And there is research that shows that children that are learning when they're young in multiple languages sometimes develop their language skills a little bit later because they have more to synthesize. So they are hearing different rules, different pronunciations, different sounds. You know, they're hearing lots of different things. And so it takes them a little while to put it all together, but then they catch up and then they know more than one language. So yeah. Does anybody have questions about these practices? Okay, let's move on. So just some of the things that I already talked about with singing are up here, but a couple other reasons why it's important. It supports memory and routine. Maybe some of you remember a song that you sang in school, or a song that you sang at home or in church or wherever it was from when you were a child. Does anybody have a childhood song that they still, I'm not going to make you sing it, but that you remember, you could sing, that you remember the words to?
Yeah, of course. I was
sure the
just
song
thinking
is?
about that. I can remember still from first grade learning to spell the word down. And our class had this rhyme that was like, hey Lauren, hey what? Hey Lauren, hey what? What's the way to get down? DOWN, and that's the way we get down. And to this day, I still, like, when I write the word down, hear that in my head. So it is really powerful. And thinking about what you mentioned before about how singing slows down language for children. My daughter is learning a second language in her pre-K program. And while she can't, you know, she doesn't say a lot of words in Spanish yet, she can sing a whole lot of songs in Spanish, which is a really cool feature, and makes me think like, okay, like when it's slowed down, like she really is, you know, starting to be able to hear that and memorize those sounds.
Yeah. Yeah, I still remember some of the Schoolhouse Rock songs. And like I remember the preamble to the Constitution, which is knowledge I will never need. But I remember the whole thing because there's a Schoolhouse Rock song, and I remember the melody and I remember the words. So, you know, singing, it sometimes it feels like it's just fun, like, you know, quote unquote, just like playing, you know, it feels like it's just fun,
Right.
but it is very clearly we are learning through it. We're remembering things, and it also helps support routine. So, you know, if you have a child that hates diaper changes or has trouble with transitions from, you know, one activity to another, whether it's dinner to bath time or bath time to bedtime, or, you know, school, leaving school to go home, whatever it is, singing can help kind of like ease those transitions, let children know like, okay, I recognize this song. You know, something's going off in my brain that I realize that now it's time to do something else, or whatever it is. So if you can add a song into your routine in those places where it could be helpful, like on the diaper changing table, or, you know, before bedtime, that it can really help with those things in addition to like just the language skills. And it just makes things fun, and it's comforting. There's a reason why lullabies are a thing in every culture, you know. It's comforting, and it builds those positive associations. And some ways that you
I
can.
found this video on YouTube with these songs called kid songs that I used to listen to when I was like 3. And I was showing it to my daughter, who's like 10, 11 months right now. And I haven't heard these songs in like years, like decades, 3, 4, 3, you know what I mean? And I actually, when it was playing, I could remember all the words,
It came
you
back.
know, like, yeah, like 34 years later. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a super powerful practice, right? Thanks for sharing that. And I remember kid songs too. They're always like kids in their little jeans, like out in the world, like running, like, you know,
Yep.
at the zoo or like getting on the bus, and they were singing their
Yeah.
songs. And now I'm gonna look them up on YouTube.
I'd like to do that as an adult and see how far I get.
Yeah.
Getting on the bus.
Yeah, it would be like Sandra the musical. And so to incorporate the singing into your day, if you want to incorporate more singing into your day, like I said, associate it with certain parts of your routine. Sing along to the radio. A lot of times people think of singing with kids as just Itsy Bitsy Spider and just Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but you can sing songs you like. You can decide what you think is appropriate of the music that you like, but you know, it doesn't have to be kids songs. Those are just, you know, those are great. And so are, you know, so is exposing children to lots of different kinds of rhythms and different types of music. You can try reading books you can sing. So, you know, at the library, there's lots of books where the text of the book is a song. And I'm going to stop my share just for a second so that I can show. Oh, my background's blurred. Okay, so this one, we're there. There we go. Babies on the Bus. Okay, so Babies on the Bus is like the wheels on the bus, obviously. And so the text of the book, you might not be able to see when I open it up, but you can see there's little babies on a bus. And the text of the book says, the doors on the bus open and close, open and close, open and close. The doors on the bus open and close all through the town. And spoiler alert, the babies, they go bumpity bump bump, and the driver goes shh, and all the babies fall asleep. So you can sing this whole book. And so you're developing some of those skills like the print awareness at the same time that you are doing all of those great things that singing does. And another great way to build singing into your reading is to sing books that aren't necessarily songs, but have, you know, rhythm and rhyme. And you can make up your own melody, kind of a sing-songy melody, or you can match it to a melody you already know. So Brown Bear, What Do You See is a classic book that a lot of, you know, children have at home or they have in their classroom. Definitely we have not a million copies at the library, but many. But you can actually sing it to Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So that would look like Brown Bear, what do you see? I see a red bird looking at me. And you sing the whole book that way. So that's just one way you can incorporate some more singing into your routine. Does anybody have favorite books that involve music or rhythm or rhyme that they'd like to recommend? Well, if you would like recommendations, you can talk to a librarian at your public library, and they would love to direct you in the direction of picture books and board books that you can sing. And remember, your little ones are not judging. If you don't feel like you can sing well, it doesn't matter. Your child just wants to have fun with you, hear your voice. They are not connoisseurs yet. They will not care. And so, you know, it's a no embarrassment zone. That's what I like to say at story time. So talking, that's the T in STAR. It exposes children, obviously, to rich and fluent language. As I said, it's important, even before children can talk back to you, to talk with them. And it's key to kindergarten readiness. So there's a lot of research about what's called the word gap. Basically, the research shows that children who have heard more unique words before they enter kindergarten are better prepared when they get there. And that's through metrics that you may or may not be comfortable with, such as testing in third grade, etc. But children that have experienced more vocabulary words prior to going to school often show better test results, better reading scores, all of those things by the time they get to third grade. And ways that you can talk every day. I already mentioned some of them. I'll skip those, but reciting fun rhymes is one that I didn't mention. So you can find a book at the library with lots of rhymes in it. Again, librarians would be more than happy to direct you to those. But you know, even just something really simple like one that I do with my little one a lot is I take my finger on his belly and I go round and round the garden goes a little bear. One step, two step, tickle you under there, and I tickle his little armpits, and he loves it. And you know, when I don't have anything to say, when I'm sick of talking about cooking, I just like pull out some rhymes. So if you can just learn, you know, 4 or 5 and bust them out, it's another way you can incorporate talking. Any favorite rhymes in the room?
That's so funny. This one, it sounds kind of mean when I say it out loud, but that was a
A
favorite
lot
in
of
our
nursery
household.
rhymes
So
are.
it was like, yeah, it was called Bumblebee, Bumblebee. And so it was Bumblebee, Bumblebee, come from the barn, come to get so-and-so right under the arm. And then, you know, would tickle them. And so that's one that we did.
Yeah, and there's one that I love that where you bounce the little one, whether it's a toddler, it doesn't matter. Like toddlers love this. It doesn't have to be a baby. Bounce them on your lap. Rickety, rackety, rocking horse, over the hills we go. Rickety, rackety, rocking horse, giddy up, giddy up. Whoa! And you lean back and they go, ah. You know, so there's lots of rhymes. Story time is a great place at the library to learn some of those. If you don't have a repertoire, because I know why would you, right? You didn't have kids until recently or something. And like I said, there's lots of books, like Debangshu mentioned with kids songs, lots of YouTube videos of teachers, especially after the pandemic, now that there's all of these videos that teachers have made, pre-K teachers, daycare providers, you know, lots of videos out there that are demonstrating different rhymes that you can do. And so last but not least, the bread and butter of the library is reading. It promotes all the early literacy skills, and especially if you're reading aloud with your little ones before they go to school, it's building that positive association that's going to be an important foundation for them. So choosing books for reading aloud with little ones, obviously there's lots of good books out there, but not all of them are great read alouds. You might remember a book from when you were little. I've done this a bunch of times. I remember a book that I read in school, or my teacher read us when I was a little bit older or whatever, that I loved. And then I think, oh, I can share this with my baby, or I can share this at story time. And then I read it and it is very long, very wordy, super intricate plot or whatever it is, takes, 20 minutes to read it. So not all great books are great read alouds, especially with this age group. When we're talking about babies and toddlers, of course, if they're going to be handling them, sturdy board books are great. That's like the one that I held up, the babies on the bus. Boop, boop. If you can see it, there it is. It's got thick cardboard pages, so they can chew, they can throw, all the things they're going to do with it. Large, simple illustrations are great. They are easier for them to make out, especially young infants. I know most folks on this call probably are not dealing with young infants. It's probably more toddlers. But black and white and high contrast colors are great for the youngest infants who can't see all the colors yet. Not too long or too wordy. It doesn't even have to be a whole plot. It can be 1 or 2 words on a page that you can point to, you can read, you can talk about the picture. It's a starting point for conversation. Rhythm and rhyme are great, not only because you can sing them, but because it builds those phonological awareness skills. It builds it helps children with prediction. Once they get to that point, they can start to predict what the rhyming word is going to be or what's going to happen next. As I mentioned before, repetition is super important. So repetition of books is okay. It's okay to read the same books over and over. Add some new ones in, sprinkle them in where you can, but those favorites are favorites for a reason. And of course, follow your child's lead. So some children that I know this question came up as well. Some children have trouble sitting still for a whole book. It's okay. Time with books is actually more important than reading a whole book from beginning to end. So if you're spending time, fun time with books, quality time with books, opening them up, reading some of the pages, you know, offering them to your child, giving them a chance to be in a room with books, you know, a book-rich environment is what it's often called. All of those things are super important, and reading a book from beginning to end, you'll get there eventually. Toddlers are wiggly. They might not sit still. Read as much as you can, read a page here and there, stop, go back to it. You can even not read the words. You can just talk about the pictures. Take a little picture walk through the book and talk about what's happening. Play a game with the book. Try to find all the letter B's in the book. And then maybe they'll be engaged in a different way with the text. I'm just doing a quick time check. Okay, got 10 minutes. And just some quick read aloud tips. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's okay to take a break or so. Ask questions. Even again, if your little one is not super verbal yet, you can still ask questions and invite guesses. Don't be afraid of a little silence. It can take up to 12 minutes for a little one, or 12 minutes. Oh my gosh, no. 12 seconds. 12 minutes is a little bit too long. 12 seconds for a child to hear a question that you're asking them, process it, parse it, think about their answer, think about how to verbalize their answer, and then say their answer. And 12 seconds feels like a very long time. If you count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, all the way to 12. And so that's just to illustrate that a little bit of silence is totally fine. It doesn't mean they're not engaged. It might mean that they are engaged and that they're trying to work through it in their brain. Of course, praise. When children ask questions, when they're interacting, it can be sometimes as the adult who is reading and sharing the book. Sometimes our goals are to get through the book and then put the child to bed, right? Or whatever. And so sometimes we get frustrated when a child grabs the book or asks a question that it's kind of like, no, that was on the last page, or, you know, they're trying to turn the pages or whatever it is. It can be frustrating if you're hoping to get through the plot of the story, right? But if they're interacting, if they're turning the pages, if they're asking questions, if they're doing those things, they're engaged with the book. And so remembering to like let those goals go and praise children for being involved and engaged can be really positive for them. And I mentioned in the past, on the past slide, how you can interact differently with books rather than simply reading them from beginning to end. So that is the part of the presentation that's about sort of the practices that develop early literacy, and the skills that are being developed before children go to school. And I just wanted to talk about a few things that are going on at the library, some resources you might not know about before we close out. But first, because that's the most important part of the presentation, I want to make sure if folks have questions or comments, things they want to suggest to other parents, that we have a chance for that.
Yeah, Devanshu, I know that there were a couple of questions that were submitted by registrants beforehand. I think we've covered most of what was already asked, but was there anything else?
Yeah, I put those. You want me to read them out, Drew?
Just if there was anything that wasn't covered. I'm looking. I feel like we really covered a lot of those. Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Well, then I will share a few things about the library. So I work at DC Public Library. We have 26 locations across the city, but it's one library system. We share all the same books. We offer the same services. We do have different programs, you know, different story times, different craft programs, things like that in each neighborhood based on, you know, neighborhood wants and all of those things. But for the most part, all of the things that we offer at every location. So if you check out books at one library, you can return them to a different one, and we will send them back, or transit them wherever they need to go next, to the next customer. And if you want to pick up something at a library that you're interested in that is located at Chevy Chase across town, and you're at Bellevue, you can place it on hold and we'll send it over there for you to pick up. So that's a good thing to know about the library system. All are welcome. It's all free. We never charged. The only thing that costs money is at the Martin Luther King Library downtown. There are some spaces that can be rented out for events. But other than that, all of our meeting spaces, study rooms are free to reserve with the library card. Computer use is free. Programs are free. Books, library cards are free.
Oh my gosh. And Lauren, I just have to plug the MLK library downtown. If you have a little one who is not particularly motivated to go to the library, check out this library because their children's area is amazing. There's a play kitchen and some materials there, and there's a slide. And so I find that even on days when it feels like, oh, I don't really want to go to the library, once we get into the space and there's some things to engage with, pretty soon all of a sudden the books become interesting, and my little one finds plenty of things to do there.
Thank you so much, Drew, for mentioning that. And that the Martin Luther King Library downtown on G Street is the one that's in the photo right here. It was reopened in 2020 after a 3-year renovation. So the children's room does have these cool features. It's colorful. There's playful features, like you mentioned. And we try to incorporate some of those into other locations as well. So there are other locations that have play kitchens or have, manipulatives or toys out on the floor, so that your child, if they're a reluctant reader or if they have a short attention span because they're a normal toddler, they have some other things to engage them as well in learning. So library cards, there's no age minimum. So your little one can get a library card as soon as they're born. If you live or work in DC, or if you live in Maryland or Virginia in the counties that surround DC, you can get a DC Public Library card. We have reciprocal relationship with those surrounding counties. So if you live in DC, you can also get a library card for those counties. More information about that is on our website. There are special educator cards where you can check out more materials for a longer period of time, with those special privileges if you are an educator at a DC educational facility. And there's no overdue fines and fees. So the only time you would ever have to pay is if you never ever return something. If you return something late, there is no fee or fine associated with that anymore. And so, obviously we have lots of different children's books for all different stages, and caregiver materials as well, with ideas for activities you can do with children, educator materials, with sort of some mini lesson plan curriculum type things in them. Board books for the littlest ones, nonfiction for this age group. Sometimes we don't think to go to the nonfiction section if we have toddlers and preschoolers, but there's lots of great picture books that are specifically for this age group on topics in the nonfiction section. And we also have all these online resources. So like Debangshu asked about ebooks, we have ebooks for kids. You can check them out for free on your device, through our website with your library card. We also have streaming music and movie resources and game software, all that we pay for that you can access for free with the library card. And we have lots of programs. So we have weekly story times that are starting up, they started up actually this week, May 28th. We have an 8-week session. Basically, we have 5 8-week sessions throughout the year where we have story times at all of our locations. And then we just have a couple weeks for break for staff to plan and things like that. And so that's at every single DC Public Library location. There are weekly story times on that schedule. And there's lots of other types of programs going on. You can see little ones are over here washing dishes, like they're little restaurant workers, but they're having a great time in soapy water. We have lots of STEM and sensory and play programs on top of, the traditional story times. And you can find those all on our calendar. We have some star days coming up. So those really focus on the singing, talking, reading, writing, and playing practices. There's activity stations located throughout the branch where you can do an activity. A child can get a little sticker on a passport, and when they complete their passport with all 5 activities, they can get a little prize. And so there's 3 of those coming up on these locations in June, and then there's some coming up in July and August as well that will be announced. And summer reading is not just for little ones, or not just for school age kids. It's also for little ones and adults as well. Discover Summer is our summer learning program. You complete activities and log reading time, and you get prizes throughout the summer. There's lots of fun things you can participate in, and that runs from birth through from age 0 to age 105 is what I think is advertised on the website. But if you know a 106-year-old, they're welcome as well. And that is all that I have for you. So if you want more tips on singing, talking, and reading, you can go to dclibrary.org/star. My email address is here if you have questions. I'm happy to chat over email. And if anyone has questions now, happy to stay and chat. And if not, then I just want to say thank you so much to Ready for Pre-K, to Debangshu, and to Drew, and to all of the folks that came out tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Lauren. You provided so much great information. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again briefly. All right. Can you see it now? There we go.
Yes.
All right. Debangshu, go for it. Very exciting announcement.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. We learned so much from you today. Thank you. As we wrap up tonight's session, please take a moment to fill out this short survey. Your feedback is extremely important to us, and you'll be entered to win a bundle of children's book mailed to your home. That's pretty good. Thank you so much, and good night.
Thanks so much, everyone. We appreciate you joining. Thanks again, Lauren. Have a great night.
Thank you.